some of it.
Greenland is key to our national security, and the Arctic is important for our national security.
So you agree with
and the
Trump?
president knows that.
Thank
I think he just said all options are on the table.
As for the Gulf of Mexico, stay tuned.
We're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name.
Joining us now is Caitlin Collins, who anchors The Source at the top of the next hour, also senior political analyst and New York Times senior political columnist Maggie Haberman. Caitlin, did the president-elect just riff in front of cameras today? Is he serious about potentially military action to gain control of Greenland and Panama Canal? Is that just kind of leaving options on the table for some negotiation?
I think the answer would be yes and yes, Anderson. I mean, the idea, though, that he is just coming up with this on the fly, that's not the case. I mean, he's been talking about buying Greenland since he was in office the last time, 8 years ago. It was in 2019 or so that he came up with this idea and started talking about it. He actually tasked some of his foreign policy aides at the time, one of them, and his national security advisor, Ambassador John Bolton. I'm going to talk to him in the next hour about this. He pressed him to figure out specifics on this matter. So it was something that national security aides talked about. It kind of blew up and never really went anywhere after it became public in a report by the Wall Street Journal. But it's certainly something he's entertained. And then the Panama Canal has been a fixation of his for the last several weeks from people that I've been talking to in his orbit. It is something that he has gone on at about at length, talking about Chinese influence. And it's something that people that I've spoken to have said that he seems increasingly serious about when he is talking about it behind the scenes. Now, we've heard from Panamanian officials saying that this is not happening, that they are not negotiating on this, that it is not going to belong to any other country. So it is a real question of once he does regain power 13 days from now, what this looks like, because you are seeing his incoming national security aides, Michael Waltz there, the Florida congressman, defending what Trump was articulating earlier, which is that there is a national security purpose to the United States obtaining Greenland. I think the thing that surprised people even in Trump's orbit today was that he wasn't ruling out taking military action in order to achieve those goals and in order to do that, whether it is Greenland or the Panama Canal. And so that's really going to be the question there, because that's different than some kind of negotiation or a treaty about security. That is Trump saying that he's not ruling out using the military to achieve his interest here.
Maggie, how did you see today's press conference?
Yeah, I think everything Caitlin said is correct, especially on Greenland. These things are not all the same. Panama is a relatively new focus of his, as Caitlin said. Greenland, not only has he been talking about it for some time, but a lot of people have been talking about it for some time. This idea of acquiring Greenland for strategic purposes has happened, for decades. And a close friend of Trump's suggested it to him in his first term, Ron Lauder. It's never totally gone away. But Trump is clearly in an expansionist mindset. He also keeps talking about Canada as a 51st state. That is clearly much more of a troll and sort of a dominance play. But in terms of Trump talking about military action, or at least not ruling it out, as Caitlin said, that caught a lot of people by surprise. It's not clear if that's actually something he's thinking about or something he said because he was quite visibly in a pretty bad mood during this press conference. I think primarily because of the legal challenges that he's facing this week in the New York criminal case, and with the possibility of the Jack Smith report and the documents federal case getting released. So what that looks like when he gets into office remains to be seen. But it's not a surprise that Trump, at least in his language, has never been especially respectful of sovereign borders. We'll see what that looks like in actual practice.
Well, Maggie, how much of this is about also, obviously he ran on, mass deportation starting on day one. How much of this is sort of trying to have there be focus on other things as well in case that doesn't necessarily happen as promised?
Yeah, I don't actually think that so much of things are willful distractions as just the fact that Trump and a lot of his advisors like to flood the zone with a number of things, and it swamps the media and overwhelms the media and overwhelms his critics and opposition, and then it's much harder to stop any of them. He may not get, the sweeping level of mass deportations that he has promised. It's worth remembering that he made the same promise in 2016, and it didn't quite happen that way. But do I think there will be a lot of actions related to immigration on day one or shortly thereafter? I do. And I don't think that he's especially concerned with distraction. I think he has a lot of things that he wants to get done, and he is going to throw them all out there and see what he can succeed at.
Caitlin, I want to play some more of what the president-elect said today about President Biden.
President Biden's actions yesterday on offshore drilling, banning offshore drilling, will not stand. You know, they told me that we're going to do everything possible to make this transition to the new administration very smooth. It's not smooth because they're doing that. They're playing with the courts. China's running the Panama Canal, and they come to see this Biden, this guy who should never have been allowed even to run for president. This was a Biden fiasco that that should have never happened. If we had a real president.
I mean, President-elect Trump's supposed to get in a limo with President Biden in less than 2 weeks to ride up to the Capitol for the inauguration.
Well, we'll see if that actually happens. I'm not convinced that it will necessarily take place. He's alternated between speaking highly of President Biden in recent weeks and then today clearly was fuming. He's been arguing that Biden is trying to hamper the transition. Obviously, that was the irony of ironies, given Trump was certainly trying to hamper his transition, to say the least, 4 years ago. But I think one thing he's been complaining about is the executive orders and the actions President Biden has been taking in his last few weeks in power. That's something you see every president who is on their way out do, whether it's pardons or executive actions trying to cement their legacy, whether they've had 4 years in office or 8 years. Trump himself did it 4 years ago. He actually had signed double the executive orders that President Biden has signed in this period when he was about to leave office. I think it was about 14, and Biden has signed 6 or so far, with maybe more to come. And so I think, though, really, hearing Trump speak there and listening to him as he came out today, what was so clear was that he was so angry, and he very quickly made clear what he was angry about. And that is, as Maggie referenced there, his legal cases and his issues before him, whether it's the Jack Smith report that could be coming out within a matter of days, depending on how an appeals court rules, and also whether or not he's going to be sentenced on Friday in New York, because he was just rejected by another appeals court in New York today. His attorneys are still working on that. I think that was an underlying part of so much of what we heard today.
Maggie, there has been this expectation the president-elect wouldn't pardon rioters convicted of assaulting police officers on January 6th. More than about 150 or so officers were injured. Today, he didn't seem to rule that, or he didn't rule it out. Do you think it's going to, I mean, what will make the distinction if and when he chooses those pardons, do you think?
It's not clear, Anderson. I mean, it was one of the more astonishing parts of that press conference, although I will say the assumption that he wouldn't do that was just that, an assumption. He has never said that he wouldn't, and he likes to leave himself maximum room. He is really testing what the public is going to tolerate with this suggestion about pardons for people connected to January 6th. Now, what some of his advisors were saying a year ago or 6 months ago was, well, some of these people who were arrested, were barely in the building or were not part of it, or and so forth, and that's why this is going to be acceptable to people if we issue these clemency grants. But pivoting from, he got asked a question specifically about roughly 140 police officers who were injured that day, and would he issue clemency grants to people who were involved in those incidents? And he answered by saying Ashley Babbitt, a supporter of his, was the only person who was killed. So we will see where this goes, but the question of exactly who gets clemency here in terms of the pool of people connected to J6 and who doesn't has been a very hard subject to pin down for the last couple of months, I think, because there is not agreement within Trump's world on what to do.
All right. Maggie Haberman, thanks, Caitlin. We'll see you at the top of the 9 at The Source. Your conversation you mentioned with John Bolton. Next, in a rising sea of social media disinformation, what to make of Mark Zuckerberg's decision to end fact-checking on Facebook and Instagram. The always interesting Professor Scott Galloway has a lot of thoughts on that. He joins me. Also ahead, an update from the fire line